Siren Head, Blue. One of the main summoners behind the giant incident. With their actions, these Siren Heads could have led to the revelation that all the scary stuff told in stories around campfires are potentially fact rather than fiction. The motivation behind their actions isn't known, but these Siren Heads, like the brown variant in our records, are malicious creatures. Blue Siren Head is the subject of this report. It's much smaller than the other Siren Heads, being around 7 feet in height when fully extended. It is normally a greyish-blue colour, and its torso is much stockier than those of the other Siren Heads. Blue is very different to the other Siren Heads in its method of hunting. Instead of luring victims to itself, it will remain in one place and sound its sirens. When that happens, whoever hears it goes berserk and starts attacking everything around them. The emotions eventually fade, though Blue will rarely allow that to happen, continuing to sound its siren and forcing its victims into a frenzy. The creature will keep it up until the victims die of exhaustion. It tends to hang around islands and water sources because it likes to use water to extend the reach of its call. It also tends to conceal itself underwater and let the sound of the water conceal its presence. From its actions, it seems that Blue is more likely to work from a distance than the other Siren Heads, including Brown. At the same time, its normal siren call is effective at a much greater range than the other Siren Heads. Blue Siren was located in New York after reports of unprovoked riots occurring on Coney Island reached our agency. The source of the riots was unknown and potentially anomalous, so Agent Dakota was dispatched to assess the situation. Dakota was a dedicated agent, even-tempered and good at using logic and reason in his pursuit of creatures and items. This should have been an easy assignment for one of his skill level. Go in and confirm the nature of the riots and the likely cause. Ascertain whether the source was human or creature, then report back. A cooldown assignment for an agent who had been in the field as long as Dakota had been. But whoever assigned the mission left out a great deal of information. Facts that should have resulted in more than a single agent being dispatched, no matter how capable. This should have been a mission for a full squad at the very least. He walked into a nightmare. People were fighting with each other instead of enjoying the festivities. Half the people were lying, panting on the ground, weakly hitting each other with whatever they could reach. A quarter were still fighting strong, tearing each other apart. The rest were dead. Dakota called for backup, but then the Siren Head sang again. He found his logic and reason stripped away as an unending rage filled him. He tried to resist, but he found himself so angry at everything and everyone around him. He pulled out his pistol and began to fire. Dakota didn't stop when all of his clips were empty. He slugged the nearest combatant with his pistol, then dropped it in favor of his baton, brutally clubbing all within reach. Once that was broken from the damage incurred by multiple cranial impacts, he pulled out his knife. An agent in a rage is a nightmare to fight, especially for civilians. His training and years of combat experience had transformed him into a walking catastrophe. Fueled by rage and possessing strength and endurance that kept him on his feet when others around him were too exhausted to move, he methodically took down everyone he encountered. When the siren stopped, Dakota snapped out of it to find himself surrounded by bodies. With an exclamation of horror, he lost everything in his stomach, vomiting on the already messy ground. He could barely get his head around what was going on. He also didn't get a chance to muse on it because the siren started again and his vision flashed red once again. The next time Dakota snapped out of it, he found himself on a yacht. He was accompanied by a lot of bodies and he was drenched in blood. A sudden flare of pain revealed that he had a knife sticking out of his side. The yacht was carrying him toward another island. He didn't have time to go over what had happened to him and just how many other people he had hurt, because the sirens went off again and he felt himself blanking out once more. When Dakota regained himself, the knife in his side was gone, as was his entire right hand. He hurt everywhere and there was blood in his mouth. He had a sick feeling that it wasn't his own. Without hesitation, he ripped strips of fabric from his shirt, field dressing his injuries and wadding up the remaining cloth to plug his ears with. As prepared as he was likely to get, Dakota looked around and found himself on a small island, along with several others. The other people were just as wounded as he was, and they were groaning or sobbing in pain. He could make out a distant city across the water, and a lot of the opposite shore was on fire. The sirens started, this time even louder than before. The plugs worked a little, so while Dakota felt the anger rising within himself again, he managed to hold on to his sanity and prevent himself from being overwhelmed. The same could not be said for the other occupants of the island. Before his eyes, they rose to their feet and attacked one another again, each ignoring their own wounds. He wanted to help them, but the sirens were loud and appeared to be coming from nearby. So Dakota limped his way closer. He heard people stumbling after him as well. It was all he could do to outpace them and keep moving, because if he stopped, he wasn't sure he'd be able to get moving again. The island was sparsely populated with trees, and that was a help. It gave him something to lean on and brace against in order to keep going. Eventually, he made it to a clearing, and sitting on a stump, blowing its siren, was Blue Siren Head. It wasn't paying any attention to him, focused as it was on blowing its siren for as long as possible. He knew he had to stop it, but as he stepped forward, Dakota coughed up blood. He looked down to see that a sharpened stick had been driven through his back, with enough force to emerge from his front. Behind him stood his assailant, their hands still grasping the stick. They were almost foaming at the mouth. The siren stopped, and their eyes cleared. Rage was replaced with horror, and they ran away, sobbing. As they released the stick, Dakota dropped to the ground, as though it was the only thing that had been holding him up. Running didn't help Dakota's murderer, of course. It wouldn't help anyone on that island. As the agent lay dying, his camera picked up Blue Siren Head suddenly standing up and facing southwest. It inhaled deeply, its large chest expanding hugely. The sound that tore free from the monster was nothing at all like its earlier calls. The noise was loud enough to kill Dakota outright, as well as everyone else on the island. And it was answered by 3 other screams in the distance.